Lavina Johnson in Iraq. She was found with bruises and burns on her body and a bullet hole in her head. The military ruled her death a suicide. Her parents believe she was raped and murdered and are calling for a congressional investigation.
It is really painful.
She dreamed of serving her country, but just 8 weeks after arriving in Iraq, Lavina Johnson was found dead. A gunshot wound, a burned body, and a military ruling. Suicide. Her family? They say that's not what happened. This is the story of Lavina Johnson, a soldier, a daughter, a fighter, and a case the U.S. Army tried to bury.
At 7:30 in the morning of the 19th of July, our doorbell rang. There's a soldier on our porch. He stepped in our foyer and he said, "This morning, Lavina L. Johnson died of self-inflicted wounds."
Lavina was 19 years old, bright, ambitious.
Lavina was a very disciplined child.
The first in her family to join the military. She grew up in Florissant, Missouri, a tight-knit suburb just outside of St. Louis. Her father, Dr. John Johnson, was a military veteran and chemist for the Army. Her mother, Linda, a devoted caregiver. Lavina wasn't just patriotic. She was determined. She wanted to serve her country and help fund her college education.
My daughter, Lavina, was a very patriotic person. She loved this country, and she thought she was doing something good. She thought she was doing something right.
After graduating from high school with honors in 2004, she enlisted in the Army. Her parents were proud and nervous, but Lavina reassured them she'd be okay.
She was an honor roll student. She was a very good student, and the most beautiful daughter that any mother would want to have.
In May of 2005, she was deployed to Balad, Iraq, stationed at Camp Speicher, one of the largest military installations in the region. She emailed home often, saying she missed them, but that she was adjusting well. She even joked about life on base. Then came July 19th, a date her family would never forget. That morning, Army officials knocked on her parents' door. They told them Lavina had died, that she'd taken her own life, with a military-issued M16 rifle inside her quarters. But the story didn't make sense, not to her father, not to anyone who knew her.
At 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, July 19th, there was a knock at my front door. I immediately jumped up because everyone was still asleep. And I looked out the window and I saw one soldier standing at the door. And I immediately told John, and he jumped up, and I just had a sadness in my heart. John ran downstairs and opened the door. And I began crying, and I couldn't make it any further than my balcony. And John opened the door, and the soldier took out a little black book, and he asked the question, are you Dr. John Johnson, the father of Private Lavina Lynn Johnson? And he said, yes, I am. And then he looked up and he saw me, and I'm sure he heard me. And he asked, are you Linda Johnson, the mother of Private Lavina Lynn Johnson? And I said, yes, I am. What do you want? And he opened the little black book and he began to read and said he regretfully informed us that our daughter, Private Lavina Lynn Johnson, was dead.
Lavina had never shown signs of depression. She'd just spoken with her mom days earlier. She sounded excited. She even talked about coming home for Christmas, Linda said later. There were no warning signs, no goodbyes, just a vague official statement, suicide by gunshot. But what the family didn't know, not yet, was what really happened in that room, or why the Army was trying so hard to keep them from finding out. The Army sent Lavina's body home sealed in a casket. They discouraged the family from opening it, said the injuries were too severe, but her father insisted. Dr. John Johnson wasn't just a grieving father. He was a scientist, someone who believed in facts, evidence, logic. So when he finally saw Lavina's body, He was horrified. "This wasn't just a gunshot wound," he later said. Her face was bruised, her nose looked broken, her lips were busted, and worse, her body had burn marks, as if someone tried to destroy evidence. Lavina had chemical burns on her genitals. Her right hand was burned so badly that her fingernails were detached. None of this was in the official Army report. The documents they received said she'd shot herself in the mouth with an M16. But Dr. Johnson noticed something else.
I looked her body over, and I saw a hole on the left side of her head near the temporal lobe. And so I went to the news media the next day, and I said, they said my daughter shot herself in the head. She's right-handed, and the bullet hole was on the left side of her head. On the 10th of August, the pathologist from Dover Air Force Base called me, and he said what I saw was an exit wound, and we got into a debate over what that was an exit wound from, and he finally said it was from an M16 rifle, and I thought that was ridiculous.
But the Army had already ruled it a suicide. They even cremated some of her internal organs, without the family's consent, including her tongue, heart, and vagina, making any future autopsy nearly impossible. And yet, they called it standard procedure. Still, the Johnsons didn't stop. Dr. Johnson hired independent forensic experts. He demanded full access to the Army's documents. He began to uncover inconsistencies and eventually redacted files and missing photos. One document noted no signs of struggle, but photographs, which the Army didn't release until a Freedom of Information Act request, told a different story. Lavina's body was found inside a contractor's tent, not her own quarters. There were signs of a fire, a burned rug, blood on her clothes. And yet, the official story never changed. What happened to Lavina Johnson in that tent remains unclear, but the physical evidence pointed to one thing. This wasn't suicide. This was a cover-up.
I called my brother Joseph because Joseph has a degree in criminal science. He said, I'm looking at a dislocated shoulder and a broke neck. So somebody beat her up. He said, it gets worse, man. Somebody shoved something up in Lavina. This was a rape.
The private autopsy revealed injuries the Army never mentioned. A broken nose, a black eye, loose teeth, burns on her body and genital area, bruises on her arms and torso. These weren't self-inflicted wounds. They were signs of a struggle, signs of assault. And yet, the Army refused to reclassify her death. They called it a closed case. Dr. Johnson went public. He started speaking out in interviews, conferences, even on Capitol Hill. They lied to us from the beginning, he said. They wanted us to accept it and move on. But I couldn't do that. Not for my daughter. And he wasn't alone. Civil rights leaders, women's rights groups, and military watchdogs began demanding answers. By the early 2010s, Lavina's name was circulating again, this time on social media. Hashtags like Justice for Lavina gained traction. Candlelight vigils were held in her memory. True crime podcasts and YouTube channels began picking up the story. One by one, the facts became harder to ignore. Why was Lavina's body moved before investigators arrived? Why were her clothes burned? Why were key organs removed and destroyed? And why did the Army refuse to interview the last person seen with her? A private contractor. It wasn't just about Lavina anymore. It was about the system. A system that silenced victims, erased evidence, and protected itself. The Johnsons continued their fight. They petitioned Congress to reopen the case. They gathered over 35,000 signatures in a national campaign. Still, the Department of Defense would not budge. Every request was denied. Every door closed. But for the people watching, something had changed. Lavina's story became a rallying cry for women in the military, especially black women. Lavina Johnson wasn't just a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. a soldier. She was 19 years old. She loved music. She played the violin. She was kind, funny, determined. She had a beautiful spirit, her mother once said. You just felt it when she walked in the room. Her military portrait now hangs in her family's home, framed and lit by candlelight. But justice? That remains out of reach. No suspects, no reopened investigation, no answers. And yet, the fight hasn't stopped. Every year, activists gather in her name. They post, they protest, they speak her story out loud, so it's never forgotten. My daughter did not commit suicide, Dr. Johnson said. She was murdered, and they covered it up. This isn't just about one case. It's about accountability, about the women who serve, and what happens when their voices are ignored. The Lavina Johnson case reminds us that not all enemies wear uniforms, that sometimes the danger isn't across the battlefield, but within the base, and that silence can be just as deadly as any weapon. So we ask you, not just to remember Lavina, but to stand with those still searching for the truth. Share her name, share her story, because the Army may have closed the case, but that doesn't mean we should. Justice for Lavina Johnson. What do you think happened to Lavina Johnson? Leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe for more cases like this. Gone but never forgotten.